Joining me now, NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel, who is in Amman, Jordan, for U.S. and Admiral James Stavridis, for the U.S., rather, for us, and Admiral James Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. I've got it straight. You move around so much, Richard, it's hard to keep up with you. Tell us, you spoke with a top Houthi commander this week. What is he telling you about the escalation and whether they're going to continue taking on the U.S., the U.K., the coalition?
He said they are. He was very dismissive of the administration, very dismissive of President Biden. He effectively said that President Biden doesn't matter. He told me that he is watching the politics in the United States. He talked about the Caucasus and even referenced the fact that the Israeli prime minister doesn't seem to listen to the Biden administration. So why should they? So they felt very emboldened, or he was expressing a feeling that of confidence, and he said that they will continue to carry out strikes until Israel stops its attacks on the Gaza Strip. And today there was a very large demonstration in Sana'a. They feel that they have the world's support behind them, and they feel that this administration is not an administration that Israel takes seriously, nor should they take seriously. It could be a dramatic miscalculation, but that was certainly the impression. And frankly, that is the impression that I get here in Amman as well, when Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly goes out and says we're not interested at all in a two-state solution, just on the heels of a trip by Secretary of State Blinken, who went all around the Arab world to try and put together an Arab peace plan based on exactly that. That people here who I've known for a long time, contacts, political analysts, wonder why the administration is continuing to give blanket support to the government of Netanyahu. So it was expressed to me here from people I know, and expressed to me by the Houthi leader as well, and we're seeing it in their actions.
So, Admiral Stavridis, let's talk about this. The president said the airstrikes are going to continue. How long can this tit for tat go on without a major escalation? And there is criticism from some on the Hill, from Nikki Haley last night in her town hall, that the U.S. should have gone in big and taken out the Houthi, weaponry, from the start, rather than giving them the chance to continue this.
I think the administration is working their way up the ladder of escalation. We've been through this before with the Houthis. We had this almost exact situation in 2016. After a series of attacks against their infrastructure, eventually they stopped conducting these kind of attacks. My own assessment is that you can stop them in two ways, kind of the easy way and the hard way. The easy way is you tell them to stop. You launch a couple of introductory strikes. The hard way is you just go in and continue to take out their infrastructure. I would assess over the course of these 5 raids about 25% of the ability of the Houthis to actually conduct these kind of operations has been destroyed. That's their missiles, their fuel dumps, their docks, some of their boats. We can continue that quite a while. So if the Houthis want to be defiant and continue, I think you'll see these strikes continue. And over time, either they will be deterred or they will no longer have the military capability to conduct the strikes. I'll close with this. It's a decision that'll be made not in Washington, not in Jerusalem, not in Beirut, not in Amman, Jordan. It's a decision that'll be made in Tehran, because the Iranians, despite protestations that they can't really control the Houthis, that's nonsense. They can direct this to stop. I suspect they probably will, because they are not looking for a wider war.
And Richard, let me just take you back to Israel and Gaza, which you've been covering so intensively. Netanyahu saying that he definitely will not consider a path towards a Palestinian state, which, as you know, has been U.S. and EU, UN policy for decades and decades. And that this is now the crux of a Saudi and Arab and U.S. plan for a post-Gaza reconstruction, post-war reconstruction, governance, and eventual statehood. Do you think this is final, or is there some softening in the not in his coalition, but within the government that the U.S. can exploit?
I don't think there's going to be a softening in his position or in his government. This is his position. This is the core of his identity, and it is what he's using to hold his coalition together. Since Netanyahu has been in power, in and out of power, but a dominant force in Israeli politics for nearly 2 decades, he has been opposed to a Palestinian state. He's talked proudly about opposing a Palestinian state. He's talked recently about how proud he was to stop it. He came into power at the end of the peace process. I was there. I was covering Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian peace process at the time when Ariel Sharon did a very famous march up on top of what the Israelis called the Temple Mount, what the Palestinians called the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, or the Temple Mount, or the Noble Sanctuary, excuse me. And it was the end of the peace process, and that ushered in a period of Sharon and then ultimately Netanyahu. Since then, there has been no peace process that would ever lead to a Palestinian state, and that has been Netanyahu's political space. And he was able to provide Israelis with security, with economic prosperity, and no peace process that would lead to a Palestinian state. That exploded on October 7th, and now the administration is trying to say, okay, that approach that you've had here for nearly 2 decades didn't work. The Palestinians, there was so much anger and hate that burst into the massacre that we saw. We have to go back to an original plan that will have a statehood at the end of it. And Netanyahu and his coalition simply do not agree to that, and believe that it would be a violation of all of their principles and Israeli sovereignty.
Well, the U.S. hope is that Netanyahu and others in Israel are going to want that Saudi deal so badly that they might soften. But just now we have this just in from the White House, that after reports, ours notably, which was picked up in Israel, of friction between President Biden and Netanyahu after Secretary Blinken returned from that trip and those meetings last week, they have finally spoken. It's their first conversation since December 23rd. They were speaking almost every other day during the early days of the Gaza war. And the last conversation had a dispute over Israel's refusal to turn over Palestinian revenues, hundreds of millions of dollars that were owed since October 7th to the Palestinians. So they hadn't spoken since then. And they've just spoken today. We'll have a readout coming up. Richard Engel, James Stavridis, thanks both of you.
Can I make one
much.
Other quick point, which
sure,
is
please,
in a very fiery speech a couple of days ago, Netanyahu said the prime minister of Israel must be able to say no to its friends. I would say respectfully, the United States can then say no to more aid and more weapons. These two have got to start talking.
And in fact, his speech came after our report hit the internet and was picked up in Israeli media and Israeli television and print about the U.S. dismay over his rejections to Blinken. Here we go again.